There wasn't even a chair in the room when they fired me. Just a narrow table, 2 closed laptops, and a sealed envelope with my name typed on it, centered like a name tag at a banquet I wasn't invited to. Cheryl Dahm stood across from me, like she was holding the elevator. Nolan Pierce hovered near the window, pretending to scroll his phone. I've been with Northmark Cargo Solutions for 17 years. Wesley Kane, Senior Route Operations Lead. Not flashy, just reliable. The kind of guy who knew where the gaps were before the consultants showed up. Wesley Cheryl began due to restructuring and budget streamlining. I stopped listening at restructuring. That word has a certain tone when it's about you. It lands soft, but sinks hard like drywall dust after demolition. I'd seen it in enough memos to know it was never about budgets. It was about erasure, clean, quiet, painless for them. Your contributions over the last 9 years have been appreciated, she added, her smile not reaching her eyes. I glanced at Nolan. No eye contact, just a little throat clear. Then he stepped further toward the window, as if Denver's skyline might offer him a better view of his conscience. We'd worked side by side through 3 major account expansions, even pulled an all-nighter rerouting freight during that winter storm in 21. Now, not even a glance. Cheryl slid the envelope toward me. Manila, crisp, my name printed in 12-point Arial. This includes your final paycheck severance outline and off-boarding schedule for your systems access. We'll need your badge before you leave the building. I reached for it. That's when I noticed there were 2 envelopes inside. I didn't open them, not yet. I just nodded, stood slowly, and set my badge on the table. No goodbyes, no handshake. Nolan finally looked at me, then just for a second, like he was checking a rearview mirror. I walked out the same hallway I used to walk in early before sunrise, before the machines kicked on, before anyone remembered how much had to happen, before a single truck rolled out. No one stopped me, not even Marcus O'Neill, our floor supervisor, who always gave a 2-finger salute when I came in early. He was up on a ladder fixing something near the freight bay door. Didn't even turn around. The fluorescent lights buzzed like they were stalling for time. One of them flickered. I reached the parking lot, sat in my truck, and finally opened the envelope. The top document was what I expected. Severance terms, access log-off times, a polite line thanking me for my commitment to operational excellence. But the second packet, not addressed to me, internal, confidential. Client retention, risk analysis, Q3, prepared by Dahm, Pierce Distribution. Executive review only. I froze. The header alone made my stomach tighten. I flipped to the first page. Northmark's tiered client retention grid, service vulnerabilities, high-risk churn indicators, a list of clients who were dissatisfied and why. Comments in the margins, initials, timeline, forecasts. I flipped again. Page 3, Blackstone Rail Logistics, flagged. Page 4, Redwood Syndicate, contingency required if Kane departs. Page 5, Caldera, Freight and Supply, watch list for lateral recruitment. I blinked. Wait, why would Caldera be in here? That's when it hit me. This wasn't part of the severance. This was a mistake. Or maybe karma. Maybe the final thing they handed me wasn't a box. It was a blueprint. I closed the folder carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and rested both palms on the steering wheel. My breath fogged the windshield. The building behind me loomed steel glass efficiency. Northmark Cargo Solutions, where logistics meets loyalty. Funny, the slogan wasn't even true in reverse. Before I dive deeper, please comment where you're listening from. Like and subscribe. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going back in there. And Exhibit A. It was coming with me. I joined Northmark in the spring of 2006, back when the company still had an actual reception desk, and the executive team made eye contact in the elevator. I wasn't chasing titles. I came from a long-haul family. My dad ran loads out of Salt Lake. My uncle worked routing out of Laredo before there was a system. I started on the night shift logging incoming freight at the West Dock and learning the rhythm of this business by ear. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Back then, if you kept your head down and moved freight efficiently, people noticed. Within 3 years, I wasn't just moving freight, I was building routes. I learned the bottlenecks, the drop windows, the lazy vendors. I designed the very first contingency grid Northmark ever used to reroute during storms. Nolan once joked I knew more about the Southern Corridor than our mapping software. That was before he stopped joking altogether. It's strange looking back. There's no announcement when a place changes, no email that says, starting Monday we stop caring. It just happens in fragments. A new VP comes in with ideas they got from a TED Talk. A legacy client gets replaced by a shinier one with better margins. Suddenly, your name's not on the Friday deck, and no one asks your opinion in the 9 a.m. For me, it started when Cheryl was brought in from Dakaro Freight. She wore ambition like perfume strong enough to clear a room. Her first month on the job, she quietly eliminated 3 vendor contracts I'd spent years stabilizing. When I flagged the churn risk, she told me to think bigger picture. Nolan changed around then too. He used to pull me into war rooms, throw dry erase markers at me like darts. We'd rebuild live routes in real time, laughing over coffee and panic. He once told me, "If Northmark ever falls, I hope you're the one who signs my severance." I guess he got his wish. The day I knew something had snapped was a Thursday. I remember because the vending machine was out of Diet Coke again, and Cheryl was leading a client call with Redwood Syndicate, a call I'd prepped for all week. My notes, my cost model, my freight analysis all replaced by Cheryl's new proposal built off a deck Nolan sent over without copying me. She didn't even mention my name once. I sat through the whole call muted, watching the cursor hover over her slide deck like a scalpel. That night I walked the rope board alone, just to remind myself I'd built something. My name wasn't etched anywhere, but I could feel it. In the way Line 4 ran clean after years of chaos, in the backup protocols that kicked in during storms, in the process flows I wrote when no one was watching. I used to think legacy was something you earned, but at Northmark, legacy was just a placeholder until the next quarterly target arrived. One time years ago, I gave a junior analyst a laminated sheet I'd made color-coded for optimal freight pairing during peak seasons. She framed it, called it Exhibit A, said it was the only thing that made sense her first 3 months. I found it in the break room drawer last month, coffee-stained, half-torn. That's the thing about building quietly. When they try to erase you, they think it's easy. They don't realize your fingerprints are in the very air systems run on. Part of me wishes I'd said something sooner, raised hell, demanded credit. But that's not how I was built. Maybe that's why they thought I'd just vanish. They forgot who held the real roots. And now I had their churn report. I wasn't just walking out. I was walking with something. And I wasn't the only one watching Northmark bleed from the inside. Not anymore. I was restocking lane C12 when I got the ping. Not from Cheryl, not even Nolan, from a junior scheduler who didn't even have my number, save just a mass Slack thread labeled Route Optimization, Final Draft, Sign Off. My stomach dropped before I even clicked. I knew that phrasing. I knew that thread. And I knew I hadn't seen any draft. I walked straight to the break room, sat down, and opened the thread. There it was, an 18-page routing schema. My schema, my choke point heat maps, my vendor load pairing recommendations, even the color system I'd invented for priority tiers. But the metadata authored by Eli Tran, reviewed by Cheryl Daum, approved by Nolan Pierce. No mention of me, not even in the footnotes. Eli was a smart kid, bright, eager, green. I'd spent 6 months mentoring him on vendor continuity matrices and historical backload ratios. He still got half the pairing colors wrong, but I didn't mind. That wasn't the point. What gutted me was the tone of the comments under Cheryl's name. Excellent framework, glad to see fresh thinking in this area. This format is scalable and compliant for our Q3 revisions. Fresh thinking. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a clerical oversight, this was a surgical removal, and they didn't even try to hide it. I scrolled back through my Slack history and found the message I'd sent Nolan 2 weeks earlier. I'd offered to submit the routing strategy for review, noting it would include my backlogged findings from 2022. He'd replied with one word, "Noted." That was it. They didn't reject it. They absorbed it, then handed it off to a junior and slapped new initials on it like a rebranded spreadsheet. I sat there in silence, not angry, not even surprised, just cold, because I'd seen this before. Back at Calder Freight in 2009, I watched a guy named Troy get sidelined, the same way his vendor model absorbed into a new logistics software suite. His name stripped, and his exit interview conducted in under 15 minutes. He never got another role in logistics, ended up selling home insurance in Arizona. And I remember thinking, I'll never let that be me. So I clicked back to the route optimization thread, downloaded a local PDF copy, and then I opened my private folder, the one no one at Northmark had access to. Inside was a spreadsheet titled Client Attrition Probability Index, updated version 7. Wesley Kane. It had started as a pet project, a way to track soft data client frustrations, late carrier adjustments, inconsistent rep contacts. I'd built it using public feedback surveys, rep turnover rates, and spot check audits from our post-delivery call logs. No one asked me to do it. No one even knew it existed. But buried inside that spreadsheet was something Cheryl and Nolan didn't understand, the why behind our churn. And more importantly, the when. I looked at the column I'd flagged 6 months earlier. Threshold risk, Q2, Tier 1 contracts. 4 clients, combined shipping volume $14.8 million, each one flagged for high vendor dissatisfaction and communication breakdown. Each one now being serviced under Eli's new routing schema. And suddenly I didn't feel erased. I felt armed. So I went back to the break room fridge, pulled out my sandwich, ate half of it cold, and spent the rest of the shift smiling politely whenever Eli passed my desk. He had no idea. No one did. They thought they'd taken something from me, but all they'd done was trigger the audit trail. I didn't speak to Nolan that week. I didn't reply to Cheryl's congratulatory thread. I didn't forward the metadata to HR. I just saved the download, backed it up to my drive, and started watching the tier 1s. Because the beautiful thing about systems you build yourself is that you always know where the cracks will form first. And when they do, you're the only one who knows how fast the water's rising. Next thing they know, they'll be drowning in numbers they once called irrelevant. I didn't touch the new system. I didn't need to. The Ghost Flag protocol. My old auto-escalation trigger for compliance anomalies was supposed to ping ops if anything even hinted at a misroute. Plasma shipments, perishable goods, dual-stack lithium, high-risk, high-liability. I built that logic back when I still believed prevention was worth more than performance reviews. So, when a pallet of refrigerated dialysis fluid showed up in Texas instead of Atlanta, with a temperature log that raised flags in red, I already knew what had happened. Eli had disabled the triggers, probably thought they were legacy fluff. No one got hurt. But the vendor quietly sent an inquiry to Northmark's legal inbox, then to customer success. Then somehow, to me, my burner LinkedIn message box pinged midday. Hey Wesley, apologies to reach out off cycle, but did Ghost Flag get sunset? Been noticing some rerouting deviations since your exit. Appreciate any clarity. I didn't respond. Not yet. There's still more for them to lose. But I took a screenshot, not for revenge, not even for evidence. Just to mark the moment. That was the third quiet misfire in a week. The first had been a priority shipment of neonatal meds routed through a cold chain gap. The second, a customs hold on dual-stack lithium-ion units due to mismatched manifest codes. Eli was trying to move fast. I get that. But he wasn't fixing the system. He was duct taping it and praying no one opened the hood. I'd built it to scream when things went wrong. He made it whisper. And from where I sat at a temporary desk in a borrowed co-working pod, 2 blocks from Caldera Freight HQ, I could hear the silence growing louder. Caldera hadn't offered me a title yet, but Diana Keller didn't waste time with ceremony. She handed me a list of 12 client accounts and simply said, "These are your messes to clean up now, or your victories to win. I don't micromanage either outcome." That kind of trust is rare, especially in logistics, especially after a quiet exit from your former employer. But Diana had done her homework. By week 2, I had already re-onboarded 3 legacy accounts I used to manage under NDA. No back-channeling, just competence remembered. Kelsey Lang called after hours one night. We hadn't spoken since the day I walked out. "Wes, I saw what happened with the lithium shipment. It hit us during the Tesla auto parts offload. We had to reroute using the old framework, the one you wrote." I let her speak, let the silence settle. Then she whispered what I already knew. They're blaming vendor error, but we both know better. It didn't stir revenge. It stirred precision. There's a kind of clarity that comes when the people who dismissed your value are suddenly navigating the maze you designed without a map. That week, Diana forwarded me another email. Nolan Pierce, Northmark's old EVP of Partner Relations, had sent a vague message requesting a confidential exploratory conversation regarding interoperability gaps. She didn't even open it. Let them waste time watching you. We'll build while they stare. I smiled, not because I wanted Nolan to suffer. But because I finally understood something that took me too long to learn, sometimes silence is the loudest form of memory. They hadn't hit bottom yet, but I could smell the rust in the water. They thought they were bleeding from bad luck. They didn't know the old arteries were already rotting. You ever watch someone take a shortcut through a system you built just to save 5 seconds and end up costing millions? It's not satisfying. It's sobering. Because you remember, you once believed they'd listen. The vendor email popped up again 2 days later. We've noticed a pattern in the last few manifests. Would appreciate your insight. Still didn't respond, but I highlighted a phrase pattern in the last few manifests. Because that wasn't just logistics lingo, that was the start of a paper trail. I used to think revenge would look like slamming a door. Now, it looks like letting the building rot until someone notices the floorboards shift. Let's see what happens when the next shipment goes to the wrong coast and no one remembers how to trace it back. The freight manifest was already wrong before I stepped through the bay door. Wesley Kane, that's me. The dead weight they thought they could trim when the numbers got tight. I didn't say a word as I scanned the inventory. Just took out my clipboard like I always had, ran my finger down the printout, and mentally cross-checked the pallets stacked 6 high across dock 3. 10 shipments, but only 7 had cleared QA. The other 3 sitting in limbo, no barcode tags, no thermal seals, and definitely no scheduled pickup times. And Cheryl Dahm had signed off on this. I walked back toward the office floor. Eli Tran caught my eye, gave me a half nod from across the corridor. He looked tired, same way I used to look years ago when I still believed you could fix things from the inside. Poor kid had been promoted into a title without any real power, a pacifier position, Cheryl's version of a favor. I turned the corner into Nolan Pierce's office. He didn't even look up from his monitor. Got a minute, I asked. Depends, he muttered. Is it about freight 648? It is. He sighed, leaned back. I already talked to Cheryl. She's got it covered. You can stand down. She doesn't. The manifest's off Nolan. Those 3 late shipments they haven't cleared QA, they're not even sealed. He raised an eyebrow. So, if we move those pallets, we violate every client SLA we signed for this quarter. One of those shipments is headed to the Port Authority. It fails scan, and they flag us. Then what? You want me to pull Cheryl into this? He snapped. I want you to not let her hang your name on a non-compliant manifest, I said. Calm, flat. But his jaw twitched. She says they're fine. That's all I need. I didn't argue. Just walked out with the same clipboard and the same calm pace. I'd seen enough. Because here's the truth. I already knew how this story would end. This wasn't about fixing anything. Not anymore. It was about building the record one decision at a time. That afternoon I started forwarding documentation. Quietly, precisely. To myself. I wasn't reckless. I didn't leak anything. Didn't break protocol. Just preserved the truth invoice, mismatches, policy violations, missed scan logs, falsified timestamps. Each one archived in a private folder, dated, labeled, source tracked. Cheryl may have smiled through compliance meetings, but I was the one who wrote the internal training module on shipment certification protocols. I still had the old draft saved, the one Nolan approved before Cheryl began streamlining the QA cycle. And buried in the appendix, a clause, Section 7.3b. Any shipment certified under false procedural documentation, if resulting in financial or reputational harm, constitutes a material breach of client terms and can trigger an independent audit or termination of agreement. They'd ignored the clause, but the clause hadn't ignored them. I wasn't angry, not the way I had been before. I was methodical, almost cold, because now I wasn't trying to win back respect. I was trying to prove to myself that I had been right to walk away, right to stop protecting people who never earned it, right to believe that silence used properly could be more powerful than confrontation. Emily Fox passed me later that evening by the vending machines. You ever get tired of being the only one who reads the rules? She asked, cracking open her soda. Only when I'm the only one who remembers why they exist. She gave me a strange look, like she wasn't sure if I was joking or already gone. And maybe I was in a way. Because that night back at my apartment, I uploaded one last file, a comparison between certified manifests and the raw QA logs over the last 60 days, line by line, timestamp by timestamp. The pattern was clear, and soon someone else would see it too. So, tell me when they call you irrelevant, obsolete, dead weight. Do you remind them what you built, or do you let the numbers do it for you? You already know my answer. Now ask yourself, what would you do if it was your name in the manifest? It was a regular midweek logistics review, those stale beige conference calls where half the managers muted their mics and hoped no one asked questions. But I didn't need questions. I needed one trigger. At exactly 2:38 p.m., I keyed in the script I'd written years ago when the old legacy protocols still mattered. A quiet watchdog process, meant to cross-check compliance sign-offs between QA and freight cycle reports. The moment I hit enter, it started logging. Cheryl Daum, our head of QA, was on the call. She was walking through last week's shipment metrics, blaming a missed vendor tag on the night shift. I didn't interrupt. I just let the warning flags queue. The system didn't make a noise, but inside the devlog queue, it logged every mismatch between her digital sign-off and the missing backup manifests. 13 violations. 2 marked sensitive freight class. 3 years ago, Cheryl would have caught that blindfolded, back when she still walked the warehouse floors instead of hiding in HR lingo and calendar invites. Back before she stopped answering my messages directly. I glanced at my desk. Tucked into the corner of my screen, laminated and aging, was the emergency response flowchart I'd drafted during our first warehouse overhaul. Cheryl once called it a masterclass in operational paranoia. She laughed, but she used it every time something went sideways. Now that same chart sat ignored, obsolete, except it still worked, because that audit script, it followed the logic of that chart down to the last fallback node. I let her finish the meeting. Then during wrap-up, I dropped a single note into the system under our shared compliance Slack thread. Flag discrepancy between QA sign-off Q1.3 and routing manifest 44782. Request follow-up review. No emotion, no accusations, just a single breadcrumb. By the time the Slack thread hit her screen, I could hear the shift in her tone. She stammered something about external validation cycles. Philip, our logistics director, asked if someone else had touched the manifests. She didn't have an answer. What struck me wasn't the mistake, it was how fast she tried to shift blame. No internal pause, no review, just pure deflection. 3 years ago, she would have pulled me into her office, closed the door, and said, "Wes, I think we missed something. Fix it before anyone else sees." But now she looks scared. And here's where I had to steady myself, because this wasn't a game anymore. One wrong move, and they'd pin the breach on me. But one right move. They'd realize the foundation wasn't just cracked, it was already flooding. And when they did, they'd remember the chart. They'd remember the one guy who saw it coming before the data ever made it upstairs. Not out of spite, but out of instinct. Because the ones who write the emergency playbook don't usually survive the fire. You ever feel that? That moment where silence isn't fear, it's control. Before we move on, I just want to say, if this reminds you of anything you've seen in your own workplace, do me a favor. Like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment. You'd be surprised how many people are dealing with this exact kind of rot and think they're the only one who sees it. As the meeting wound down, Cheryl sent a follow-up to our compliance alias inbox. Can we trace which user ran the validation? Script tagged audit echo LX9. The room went quiet. She didn't know I wrote it, years ago, on my personal machine, before it was ever adopted into the system. The script doesn't log usernames, only timestamps, which meant the question wasn't who ran it, it was when, and the date stamp. It pointed straight back to the day Nolan Pierce pushed through the vendor bypass that caused the chain failure in the first place. You know how sometimes truth doesn't scream, it just sits there, waiting, and by the time you notice, it's already wrapped around your ankle. Let's just say by the end of that week, the water was rising fast. And next, you'll see who really got pulled under first. I didn't say anything when Cheryl's team called my exit non-disruptive. I just stared at the access report time-stamped 4 days after my departure, clearly showing my credentials were still being used by someone inside Northmark Cargo Solutions. My name's Wesley Kane, and at that moment, I knew 2 things. 1, I hadn't logged in since the day I was fired. 2, someone was using the system I built to quietly reroute freight loads, and they were sloppy. I sat in the break room of Caldera Freight and Supply, watching my coffee go cold, while Devin, our systems lead, tried to untangle the false shipment IDs we'd inherited from Northmark's legacy logs. His eyes met mine across the table. "Wes, this isn't just bad metadata," he said quietly. "Someone's spoofing load completion signatures using your old admin bridge." My throat tightened. That bridge, a temporary bypass tool I'd written years ago during a database migration, was supposed to be sunsetted and encrypted. The only person besides me who knew how to re-enable it was Cheryl Daum. She had sat in that HR glass box 6 months ago, nodding politely as she signed off on my transition plan and locked me out at 5:02 p.m. on a Friday. She called it standard procedure, but apparently she'd kept the bridge alive. For flexibility, no doubt. I felt that old heat rising behind my ears, the same heat I'd swallowed the day I handed over the master credentials, knowing damn well they hadn't earned the system, just inherited it. That weekend I didn't touch my computer. I pulled the old badge out of the drawer and laid it on my desk, still clipped to the lanyard, still carrying the faint imprint of my thumb. That badge had unlocked everything once: the server room, the audit console, the trust of a team that actually worked weekends with me when the routing algorithm glitched. And now, it unlocked nothing, except maybe a question I hadn't been ready to ask. Why had I stayed so quiet? I think part of me still believed someone at Northmark would call, that Nolan Pierce would admit they needed help, that Cheryl would realize the mess she was in and ask for guidance. But that silence, that was my answer. By Monday morning, the question wasn't whether I would act. It was how. So I drafted a memo, plain technical precise. No accusations, just facts. Subject active breach potential via legacy. Admin credential echo. It outlined the dates of unauthorized bridge usage, load discrepancies verified against Northmark's public carrier ledger, evidence that shipments marked fulfilled were rerouted or untraceable, the fact that these discrepancies were traceable to my revoked account log. I closed with a single line: forensic review advised prior to Q4 regulatory audit, especially given Section 12.3 of the Interstate Compliance and Logistics Act ICLA, which prohibits credential misrepresentation after personnel termination. I didn't send it to Cheryl. I sent it to Diana Keller, because Diana wasn't just the new VP at Caldera. She was also the person Northmark had tried to poach 3 times before I left. She knew exactly how they played. An hour later, she called me into her office. "You sure you want to escalate this?" she asked, her tone calm but sharp. I nodded once. Her reply was immediate. "Then let me make some calls." I stood to leave, but paused at the door. "There's one more thing," I said. "Devin found packet flags that match old training access codes ones assigned to Eli Tran. He's still over there." Diana frowned. "You think Cheryl used him to reroute the loads?" "I don't know," I said, "but he doesn't have the skills to hide the logs himself. Someone showed him." She tapped her pen. "Then we subpoena the logs and let the regulators decide." I walked out of her office, pulse steady, thoughts clear. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for a call that would never come. I was writing the report myself, and when the review landed in Cheryl's inbox, she'd recognize my style instantly. Because every system at Northmark, every log policy, every credential trail had been written in my voice. So many of us walk away quietly thinking silence is professionalism. But sometimes silence is complicity. If you've ever felt erased while your work lived on, hit like. Subscribe, you're not alone. As I walked through the warehouse later that day, Zach Carver raised a brow at me. "You good, boss?" I nodded, but I kept walking, because somewhere Cheryl Daum was reading a memo, and realizing her biggest mistake wasn't firing me. It was thinking the system wouldn't remember who wrote it. She hadn't triggered the failsafe yet, but she would. 3 weeks after I walked out of Northmark, the first signal came from the outside. Eli Tran texted me a screenshot late Thursday night. It was a public LinkedIn post from one of our biggest freight partners, looking for recommendations, seeking alternative logistics providers in the Midwest. Need reliability, transparency, and resilience. That may not sound like much, but that client had been with Northmark for 11 years. I remembered the day I closed that account. I had a newborn in one arm and a Bluetooth headset jammed in my ear, pacing the living room like a madman explaining intermodal sync rates to their VP of Ops. Now they were asking the market to replace us. By Monday, 3 more clients were circling the drain. Emily Fox confirmed that inventory mismatches were piling up in the WMS. Zach Carver said the forklifts hadn't had battery maintenance in 6 weeks. Marcus O'Neill let slip that 3 of the safety audits I used to prep had been quietly postponed. Everything I kept running, they let it rot. The warehouse system wasn't just a list of machines and protocols. It was a living network, and I had been its nervous system. And without me, they still had Cheryl Daum. who, from what I heard, had finally started logging her QA findings directly into the wrong system. Twice. I didn't laugh. Not even when I found out Kelsey Lang had to come in on a Saturday to reprint the same shipping manifests 3 times. Instead, I sat with Diana Keller on a call that Friday afternoon. We were watching Altitron Auto Parts finalize their transition to Caldera. Their monthly volume alone would double our output. She asked if I wanted to reach out personally to thank them. I said no. I just sent the thank you crate, a small one, a box of dark roast, a navy blue mug, and a handwritten card that said, "For trusting the ones who kept your freight moving." I didn't sign it. They'd know. What I hadn't expected was the email from Cheryl. It hit my inbox Sunday night. I still don't know how she got my personal address. It was just one paragraph. "You made your point. They're panicking. You got what you wanted. I hope it was worth it." I didn't reply, but I read it twice. There was a part of me that wanted to scream back, "You don't get to play the victim. You pushed the wrong people out and thought loyalty was optional." Instead, I just closed the email and opened the export log from the week prior. Caldera had hit 99.4% on-time accuracy. That was legacy. That was system. I reached into the side drawer of my desk, pulled out the old black binder, the one they called Wesley's Bible back at Northmark. Policy templates, audit strategies, freight cycle diagnostics. All of it. I flipped to the page with the highlighted clause, the one Cheryl once dismissed as unnecessary. All procedural overrides must be archived and watermarked by the acting supervisor. They thought it was red tape. It was accountability. And I had the originals. So, when the first formal complaint came from a client about falsified QA compliance, I didn't need to say anything. I just sent the documentation anonymously. They wanted to call me dead weight. They forgot I was the counterbalance. And I'd only just begun to tip the scale. Because Cheryl hadn't seen the full trail yet. But she would. The formal complaint from that Midwest client didn't just rattle Cheryl, it triggered a review. Not a full audit, not yet, but a request from the legal team to retrieve QA logs for 3 shipment cycles. The kind of quiet internal escalation that doesn't hit Slack channels, just backdoor calls and nervous messages like, "Hey, do you remember where we stored the override approvals for March?" They didn't, because Cheryl had overridden them. The clause I built into the old policy binder archive and watermark wasn't optional, but she'd treated it like a checkbox. And when the logs came up empty, they didn't just blame the system. They blamed her. By Wednesday, Nolan Pierce had been looped into the thread. I could almost hear his voice in that vague phrasing from the summary systematic compliance uncertainty. That was his language. All bark, no ownership. But Diana Keller, she sent me a direct note at 7:12 a.m. Thursday. "Are we ready for the demonstration?" We were. Eli Tran had been prepping for this for 2 weeks, running comparative diagnostics on audit compliance rates between Caldera and Northmark. He loaded the data into a single slide visual 2 columns side by side, green bars on the left, red on the right. When the board at Altitron asked why Caldera's rollout had been so smooth, Diana pulled up that slide. This is why she said, "We don't just ship freight, we ship proof." That quote circulated in 3 procurement newsletters by the end of the day. Meanwhile, back at Northmark, Cheryl's name started disappearing from distribution lists. Emily Fox told me in a private message that 2 of her QA requests had gone unanswered all week. Kelsey Lang had to call the client side directly to explain why a shipment had left the dock without a certified review. No one returned her call. I didn't do any of that directly. All I did was put the truth back in their hands. And once the freight partners saw the difference, they acted faster than I thought they would. One of them issued a formal notice effective end of quarter. All contracts would be suspended pending a review of Northmark's internal controls. That was the phrase they used, pending a review. It didn't say my name, but it had my fingerprints. And Cheryl. She still thought this was about her. She didn't understand it was never personal. It was systemic. They called me dead weight. But I had designed the load-bearing wall. And now they were watching it crack. The formal QA complaint triggered more than internal chatter. 2 weeks later, I heard whispers from a former vendor that Northmark's legal team had received a preservation notice from a client's outside counsel. That's when the dominoes really started to fall. By then, I had already heard that Cheryl Daum was no longer leading QA. They hadn't announced it, but Emily Fox forwarded me a leaked memo. The language was cautious temporary restructuring of departmental oversight. But I knew what it meant. Cheryl had become a liability, and not just internally. Clients had started asking questions in writing. One of them, a longtime Northmark partner out of Milwaukee, published a LinkedIn article titled, "What Happens When QA is Just PR." The author didn't name Northmark directly. He didn't have to. The story was unmistakable references to missed cycle logs, contradictory audit trails, and a freight claim backlog that had tripled since Q2. 3 hours after that article went live, Diana Keller pinged me. "Thought you'd enjoy this one." Attached was a screenshot of a Slack thread between Northmark's CCO and legal team. I recognized the names. Some of them had been on all-hands calls where Cheryl once flaunted her streamlining protocols. Now they were arguing over legacy override logs and scrambling to locate Wesley's original freight protocol index. The one they claimed was obsolete. They were quoting my page numbers now. But the moment it all crystallized came the following Tuesday. Diana and I were walking the floor at Caldera's new eastbound fulfillment center, watching a trial run of the new WMS integration. I spotted Eli Tran near the main dispatch console, calmly walking a new hire through the cycle checks. No ego, just ownership. Diana's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, smirked, and turned the screen toward me. A press release. Northmark Cargo. Solutions to undergo. Independent compliance audit. Following client concerns. The subtitle: We remain committed to transparency, resilience, and the integrity of our operational systems. They were quoting my words, my binder, my email sign-offs. And just below that headline, tucked at the bottom of the press release, was the final admission. A single line. Wesley Kane's original QA policy framework is being reintroduced for review and potential adoption. I didn't smile, not at first. Instead, I closed my eyes and let the moment settle. Not because it was vindication, but because I remembered the night I first built that framework sitting at the kitchen table at 1:17 a.m. baby monitor on the counter, trying to solve a rotation flaw in the override protocol that no one had even noticed yet. I'd never wanted credit. I just wanted to be heard before something broke. And now the only way they could fix it was to go back to the system they threw away. They didn't call, they didn't apologize, but they didn't need to. I'd seen enough. And I wasn't done yet, because Northmark had only just begun their audit. And the clients, they were only halfway through the exit door. 2 weeks after I sent the last packet of documentation, I got a forwarded email from a vendor rep I used to work with. Just the subject line alone told me everything I needed to know. Northmark QA compliance review, urgent internal only. I shouldn't have seen it, but then again they shouldn't have underestimated the paper trail. Turns out, Cheryl had retroactively edited 3 weeks of audit reports. The metadata proved it. And when the Logistics Consortium began its annual certification review, those edits didn't just raise eyebrows, they triggered a full-blown investigation. By the following Thursday, Northmark was placed under temporary client-facing restrictions. In plain terms, they couldn't onboard new contracts until they resolved the internal discrepancies. It was public. It was humiliating. I didn't share it. I didn't need to. That weekend, I got a short voice message from Eli Tran. Just 3 words. "You did it." No gloating. No drama. Just quiet recognition from someone who knew what it took to build that system and what it meant to watch it decay. A few days later, Caldera was featured in a Freight Tech article highlighting operational resilience and leadership continuity. Diana sent me a copy in the mail, not the link, the printed magazine. She'd circled the phrase "inherited brilliance, not borrowed hype." Underneath she wrote, "Your signature is all over this, even if it's invisible." I keep that page folded in the back of my old black binder. What I didn't expect was the call from HR, not mine, Northmark's. A younger rep, someone I'd never worked with, directly asked to clarify the intent behind several legacy policies I'd authored. Apparently, there was now board-level discussion around reinstating original SOPs. I gave him what he needed, but I didn't stay on the call long. Because this was never about going back. It was about making sure the truth couldn't be erased, no matter how they tried to rewrite the past. That night, my daughter Riley asked me what dead weight meant. She'd overheard it in some grown-up conversation at school. I paused. Then I handed her the navy blue mug from Caldera, the one I'd sent to the client, the one they'd quietly sent back with a thank you card and the words, "We knew who kept us moving." She looked at it, then at me. And for the first time, I let her open the black binder. Not to read it, just to see that the things we build matter even if no one claps. The people at Northmark might still be trying to contain the fallout, or rewrite the ending. But they never understood the truth. I was never their liability. I was the reason it didn't collapse sooner. And collapse has a memory. 3 months after Cheryl's quiet resignation, I walked into the old Northmark facility for the first time since that morning she signed my termination slip. Only this time it wasn't hers to sign. Caldera had completed the full asset integration. Most of the team had come with me. The rest trickled in once the reality sank in. Northmark's board had no more answers and no more direction. And Diana had made it clear the rebuilding wouldn't happen without the people who kept it running. Cheryl Dahm was never mentioned in the acquisition memo. Neither was Nolan Pierce. But those names were the reason we rebuilt every internal escalation policy from scratch. They became footnotes, quiet, cautionary tales, buried in a section labeled Legacy Risk Assessment. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. I'd never wanted revenge. Not really. What I wanted was proof that I wasn't the weight dragging the team down, but the one carrying it forward. That all those nights spent logging shipment variances, all those times I stayed late to fix what Cheryl ignored, actually mattered. And maybe just once, I wanted someone in the room to say Wesley was right. We just didn't listen. That day never came. But when Eli Tran walked up to me, shook my hand and said, "Thanks for betting on me when no one else did," that was enough. We stood there for a moment, me, Eli, Emily, Fox, Kelsey, Zach. Marcus all gathered in the loading bay, like it was a new beginning, and it was. The paint still smelled fresh. The old plaque had been replaced. Caldera Freight and Supply, Midwest Ops. No trace of Northmark. But I kept one thing from that era, a folded copy of the final shipment report, the one Cheryl corrected the day before she fired me. I never framed it, just tucked it in a drawer in my new office. A reminder. Not of the mistake, but of the silence that followed it. Because that silence taught me the most important lesson of all. Being called dead weight only stings if you forget who you were carrying. So now I don't chase titles, or credit, or applause. I just build what lasts. And if someone needs to call me dead weight again, let them. Because this time, I'll let the numbers answer. The clients already did. Share your own experiences. Like and subscribe for more stories.